Well, what do you do when you're the wealthiest person on the planet? When rather than pay for an island holiday, you could buy the island. When you already own a mansion and a fleet of fancy cars. Your investments and share portfolio are worth so much, you never have to work again. Imagine having so much money that you don't have to worry about bills. You can buy whatever you like. Well, what's left? Well, we saw the answer last month, which was a big one in the billionaire space race. Richard Branson just managed to pip Jeff Bezos into space. On the 11th of July, Virgin Galactic launched their Spaceship 2 spacecraft 80 kilometers up to suborbital altitude. Well, the spacecraft is actually flown into the atmosphere by a carrier aircraft nicknamed White Knight 2. When they reach a certain altitude, the spacecraft fires its rocket engine and launches into space. It performs a backflip in microgravity before returning to Earth in a glide and landing on a runway like a conventional plane. On the 12th of July, Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket flew even higher, 100 kilometers up, although still suborbital. Well, this is a proper rocket. It launches vertically from the ground, and when the rocket nears the apex of its flight, the capsule disconnects from the rocket, sending its passengers a little higher to enjoy a few moments of weightlessness. The capsule returns to Earth under the control of a set of parachutes, while the rocket returns separately to be reused. And next month, Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, will make their first launch when the Crew Dragon spacecraft makes its first trip to space. Well, this is actually an orbital flight, meaning that the crew will be in space, orbiting the Earth for 3 days. Well, the good news is that you'll be able to book a spot on one of those spacecraft soon. And that is if you have a spare 4 million rand lying around. Well, Virgin are charging $250,000 a ticket. Blue Origin haven't disclosed how much they're charging, but they did hold an auction for the first flight, with the winner paying $28 million. Ironically, they couldn't make the maiden voyage, and so the spot went to someone else. But this new venture into space tourism from some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet has left some unimpressed. The billionaires have been blasted, if you'll excuse the pun, for wasting money, polluting the environment, and not caring enough about problems here on Earth. Well, space tourism has been called the vanity project of the rich and famous. Well, these billionaires and their companies have been careful to avoid that perception by involving themselves in various philanthropic projects to a greater or lesser degree. But do they really want to help the masses and create space travel for all? Or is it simply about the money? To quote the Toronto Star, the billionaire space race between Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos is one small step for greed and one giant leap for ego. Well, it's easy to point fingers at the billionaires of our world. They have an obscene amount of money. But before we judge them too harshly, well, we need to look at our own lives. Well, greed is something that affects all of us. All of us need to think carefully about how to be good stewards of what we have, whether that's a few billion rand or a few cents or somewhere in between. And so today, Jesus is going to challenge us about our money. How do we live as disciples of Jesus when it comes to our wealth? How do we avoid being greedy? Well, Jesus has a lot to teach his disciples about wealth and riches in Luke's gospel. And this morning, we look at just one of those passages. So it's Luke chapter 12, if you'd like to follow with me in your Bible. We pick up the action a little bit before what was read for us earlier. And so our passage begins with a large crowd listening to Jesus. We'll listen from verse 1. In the meantime, when so many thousands of the people had gathered together that they were trampling one another, he began to say to his disciples. So Jesus is teaching his disciples exactly what it means to follow him. What does it look like to be a disciple of Jesus? Which is what we want to know too. But as Jesus is busy teaching them various things, suddenly someone in the crowd pipes up, verse 13, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Well, you see it often in families. A parent will die and there'll be a squabble over the will. Things can get ugly as siblings argue over who gets what. In Bible times, rabbis often served as mediators in such disputes. And so this man approaches Jesus in the hope that he'll help him. We aren't given any further information about the dispute, but from what the man says, it's clear that he doesn't actually want Jesus to be an arbiter. He wants Jesus to side with him. Tell my brother. But Jesus replies, man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you? Well, Jesus refuses to take sides in the argument. Instead, he uses the question as a teaching opportunity. He sees the motive behind the question. He sees what's really going on in this man's heart. It's greed. And so Jesus replies in verse 15, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions. Which Jesus identifies the core problem behind the question as one of covetousness. Just another word for greed, which is how many other Bible versions translate it. The one that Matt read for us this morning translated it as greed. Well, there's more to life than having lots of stuff. The one who dies with the most toys doesn't win. And yet that's exactly what greed tells us. It whispers sweet nothings in our ear. I'll be happy if only I earn just a little bit more. I've been working hard. I really deserve that new car or cell phone upgrade or holiday or home entertainment center or fill in the blank. The ancient Greek philosopher Plutarch summed it up well when he said, greed never rests from the acquiring of more. Well, our problem is that greed is no longer seen as bad. There are support groups for a whole range of addictions. You can go to meetings of Clutterers Anonymous or Online Gamers Anonymous. There's even a website for Procrastinators Anonymous, although it's down at the moment and the moderator isn't sure when he's going to be back to get around to updating it. But there are no meetings for Greed Anonymous. Why not? Well, because our culture supports and even glorifies greed. Look at the magazine covers plastered with the faces of celebrities and CEOs, or the super rich are our heroes. We all secretly, or maybe not so secretly, desire what they have. After all, who couldn't do with a spare billion? So Jesus tells a parable to illustrate the foolishness of greed. I'm going to read it again, highlighting the pronouns from verse 16. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. Well, at first glance, you may think that the rich man is actually wise. He's produced a bumper crop and so makes plans to store all his goods. But did you notice the pronouns I, my? The rich man is only thinking about one thing, himself. The reason he wants to store all his goods is so that he can sit back and relax, take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But from God's point of view, the rich man is actually a fool. God knows what the man doesn't. Verse 20. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Well, the rich man's days are numbered. His life will be demanded from him that very night. All his plans will come to nothing. Well, our eyes have been on Tokyo over the past 2 weeks with the Olympic Games. And Mona Nomura is a technology strategist living in Tokyo, and she tells a story. After she attained what she thought was success, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She spent the days up until her death regretting almost all the choices she made and beat herself up day after day. One of her last journal entries included reflections on how unappreciative she was with the things in front of her, and finally realizing happiness does not lie within superficial matters, a little too late. Likewise, the rich man planned for a life of comfort in this world, but he neglected to plan for the only life that really matters, eternal life. Well, after he dies, what will happen to all his treasured possessions? Who will get them? And it doesn't really matter. It won't be him. And so Jesus concludes the parable with this lesson in verse 21. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Well, those who seek wealth end up with an empty life. We might think that a fancier car, a bigger house, or a better paying job will bring us joy. But a fancier car just means we worry more about getting it dent. It means insurance premiums increase. And a bigger house means more maintenance, extra security to protect the property, an increase in the rates account. A better paying job means more is demanded of you, longer hours, less time with family, less time with God. Now, I'm not saying that wealth is bad. It's not a bad thing when your business is successful. It's not wrong to receive a promotion or a salary increase. It's not wrong when your investments do well. It's what you do with it. I wonder, maybe the host can mute everyone. Thanks. But it's what you do with your wealth. That's the problem. And do you store it all up for yourself? Well, that's greed. And greed makes us do dumb things with our money, like buying cool stuff that never quite satisfies, or buying stuff simply because it's a bargain. Well, how else could home shopping channels stay in business? Do you really need that garlic press or banana slicer? What about an egg separator? Surely the shell works just as well. How about a shower curtain with pockets for your phone, or a plastic hamburger holder? And how many of us have unused exercise equipment? Those dumbbells that are tucked away under your bed, along with your good intentions. Well, in so many areas of our life, we know when enough is enough. After a good meal, we're satisfied. We don't call the waiter over and order another rump steak, thinking that somehow we're going to be more satisfied. And yet our pause button shorts out when it comes to money. We feel good when we get a raise at work, but our increased income drives us to want more. We get a raise, we spend it, and then adapt to our improved circumstances. And before long, we're no longer happy. We desire more money, which is why after a salary increase, your happy meter stays in the same place or even decreases. Studies in America and Britain have showed that people are less happy today than they were in the past, even though their salaries have increased over the same period. A professor of economics at the University of Southern California, Richard Easterlin, calls this the hedonistic treadmill. It's the tendency of a person to remain at a relatively stable level of happiness despite a change in fortune. It's why they never crown a winner of the rat race. We're all so busy running on the treadmill that we fail to realize that happiness is found by stepping off. Take, for example, someone winning the lottery. At first, the person is ecstatic to have become a millionaire overnight. But after several weeks or months, the newly minted millionaire becomes accustomed to their new lifestyle and experiences a corresponding decrease in happiness. The truth is that money can't make us happy. The more we have, the more we want. So how much is enough? Well, a few years ago, a study in America found out that the contentment calculation was $50,000 a year. I don't know how they came up with that figure, but what would you be satisfied with? 200,000 Rand a year? 300,000 Rand? 500,000 Rand? A few million? Well, the point that Jesus makes is that it doesn't really matter what you earn. The fool stores up wealth for themselves. The fool is greedy. The wise person is rich towards God. So what does it mean to be rich towards God? What does that look like in practice? Well, let me tell you the story of Charles Francis Feeney, known as Chuck. Well, Chuck was born in 1931 and was a co-founder of the Duty Free Shoppers Group. Now, the duty-free shops that you see at the airport, well, that was him. In 1982, Chuck founded the Atlantic Philanthropies charity. Well, 2 years later, after making provision for his family, he transferred the bulk of his wealth into the charity. By the end of 2016, the charity had distributed all of those funds, $8 billion worth, including $422 million to South Africa. Well, today, Chuck estimates his net worth to be about $1.5 million. That's an M, not a B. Well, if giving away $8 billion isn't amazing enough, well, Chuck did all this anonymously right up until 1997 when he was finally found out. What an incredible display of generosity. The opposite of greed is generosity. In fact, a little later on in this chapter, Jesus says, sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So generosity is part of what it means to be rich towards God. Are you being generous with what God has given you? Is giving to the Lord's work the first thing you think of when you get your monthly salary? Or do bills and groceries and entertainment allowances take priority? Or giving only happens if there's anything left over at the end of the month? Well, God gets the dregs. Now, I know that Southern Cross is in a time of transition at the moment. Jason has left and you're not employing a pastor. Well, does that mean that you should stop giving? Well, no, keep giving. You could set up a building fund if your goal is to have your own place one day. You could distribute those funds to other churches in our denomination. With COVID, there are certainly no shortages of struggling pastors and churches. Perhaps you support an NGO or bless a missionary by giving a one-off donation. There are a host of options available. It's up to your council to decide how to use those funds wisely. But the point is that giving to the Lord's work should still be a priority, even though you don't have a rector at the moment. What about your possessions? Are you generous with what God has given you? If you have a holiday home, do you share it? Or host a missionary while they're on home assignment? Perhaps there's a family or church who's really struggling and can't afford a holiday, so you let them use your place for a weekend. Maybe you have a large area for entertaining in your home. Do you offer it up to host newcomer events or perhaps a Christianity Explored group? Maybe you host a small group. If you've got DSTV, do you invite people to your home to watch the rugby? But if you're anything like me, you might start out with good intentions. It will be great to have a bigger house so that I can use it for ministry. My Netflix will come in handy for hospitality and evangelism opportunities. But those good intentions seem to fade away over time. We become possessive of our things. It's my stuff. I don't want to share. Now, I was studying at George Whitfield College. There was a guy named Jan Hendrik there. Well, Jan Hendrik owned a clapped-out rust bucket of a car. It didn't look like it would make it around the block, let alone wherever he wanted it to go. And most of the people that come to study at college are from out of town and so have to rely on public transport. But Jan Hendrik saw his car as something that could benefit the whole community. Well, his car was always available for anyone to use. You simply had to ask him for the keys and he would hand them over, no questions asked. Well, Jan Hendrik knew how to be generous with what God had given him. And isn't it amazing that the more generous we become, or the less greedy we are? So will you commit to radical generosity? Don't hold on to all your stuff. It's like squeezing jelly. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips out of your fingers. When you die, do you want to stand before God and say, but look at all the stuff I accumulated? Well, on that day, it won't matter what car you drove or where you lived. It won't matter how many zeros on your paycheck or how much money you have in the bank. Your cryptocurrency will count for naught. God won't care how many pairs of shoes you own. He won't be impressed by the clothes in your cupboard or the appliances in your home, the books on your shelves or your holiday home. And God wants us to be generous with what he's given us. So don't be like the rich fool. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because life doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions. Rather, be rich towards God. If the rich man had been rich towards God, perhaps he would have said something like this: God, all this is yours. You've made my fields prosper. Show me how to use my riches in a way that displays that you are my treasure and that riches are not. I already have enough. I don't need a bigger and bigger safety net. I don't need better food, better drink, and better parties. I want to make merry, but with those people who've been helped by my generosity. I want to be generous with my giving because you taught me, Lord, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Well, let that be us too.